you mentioned pair programming and test-driven development. We're huge fans of those both, but what we've come to see is that there's a lot of pushback. So whenever you're jumping into a new software project, right, there's a lot of pushback from the stakeholders that are non-technical to do TDDs, because that ultimately just kind of doubles their cost if the developer is kind of writing their tests after writing the code. So there's a lot of pushback on that. Pair programming as well. They're not, developers have a sense of, I don't want to, I want to just be able to focus on my work, not kind of pair program with someone else just to help them out. So how can we convince these teams to kind of adopt these kinds of models that are so valuable for the end result of that product?
Well, let's first of all attack the premise here. The premise is that the stakeholders don't like it. The stakeholders have no business knowing about it. There's no reason to go to stakeholders and say, oh, by the way, we're doing test-driven development, blah, blah, blah. That's none of their business. They've hired you to be the experts on how to develop software. So you are in charge of how you develop software. If you believe that test-driven development is the right way to go, if you believe that it is the most productive way to write code, then of course that's what you're going to do. And certainly I believe that. If somebody came to me and said, you must stop writing tests, I would double all my estimates. That's the way I'd answer that. Say, okay, well, it's going to take me double the time because boy, oh boy, if I'm not writing tests, I'm going to be in debug mode for 3/4 of the time. So,
right. What about the argument that, you end up, for people that are, again, non-technical, not necessarily understanding the entire process and the concept, they're just saying, look, if it's going to take you twice the time to write the test for any specific piece of code, right, you're kind of doubling my expenses with that specific project, right? So there's this kind of expectation of developers writing quite bug-free code that doesn't need to have the unit test written everywhere, right? So I guess that's what I was mostly referring to, that pushback towards the budget that's associated with kind of doubling the work, right? Writing the functionality, then writing the unit test or integration test for it.
Well, the premise of that question is that writing the tests takes double the effort. And it doesn't. It takes half the effort, right? If you're doing test-driven development, you will spend much less effort on your code than if you're not doing test-driven development. And if the stakeholders challenge you, that is the answer. You just go back and say, oh, no, you don't understand. Writing these tests makes us go much faster. Speed and volume of code are not related. The speed of development and the volume of code are not related.
That's true. What about developers that kind of truly believe it's not their duty or responsibility to write the test for the code that they've written? How do you counter those types of personalities, to call them like that?
Well, I live in the United States. I'd just fire them. That would be my approach to that particular problem, because I don't believe that is an attribute of a program. I think that's the attribute of a hack. Now, and I don't want to have hacks in my company. Now, in other countries, it's much more difficult to fire non-performers, but I would be putting immense amount of pressure on them to become professional, to adopt some kind of ethical standard. It is not acceptable to produce code that you have not proven correct. Right? It's just not. You can't just sling a bunch of code out there and hand it to people without the proof that you've done the work to show that this code is correct. And I don't know what that proof could be other than a good suite of comprehensive tests.
That's actually super valuable advice. That's something we always struggle with, trying to find the balance between people that are intrinsically talented and smart and write good code, but they're so bummed when it comes to writing tests for their own code. So we're trying to juggle between, finding the kind of the silver bullet here that works.
When you do test-driven development and you're writing the tests first, you're not bummed about those tests, because those tests are fun. I mean, you're writing something that fails and then you make it pass. That's fun. That's what programmers live for. Now, on the other hand, if you write the tests after the fact, that's boring. That's horrible, because you already know the code works. You tested it manually. So then it feels like a waste. That's one of the reasons I love the test-driven development discipline, because it forces you to write the test first, and that's just fun.